Hello and welcome to another episode of Plugged In. I'm Gretal Montgomery, your host. Today I have to give a little disclaimer. We're going to be talking about some content that may be a little alarming or upsetting for some of our audience members. So just a little forewarning about that, especially some of our younger viewing members. But it is my absolute distinct pleasure to welcome to the show today author, motivational speaker, and survivor, and local celebrity of sorts, Melissa McCormick. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to have you. You're quite a trailblazer in the local community. There are many members of Windsor and Essex County who are familiar with you and familiar with your story. You're a local celebrity of sorts. But for those who are not familiar with your story, let's address your incredible history. At the age of 19, you experienced the most horrific kind of violation that a woman can go through. Could you share with us that experience?
Well, like you said, I just turned 19 years of age. I was in Detroit partying, so to speak, with 5 of my girlfriends. We went to a really nice restaurant for dinner. We were all dressed up, ready to go out. Now, back in '76, it was the disco days. So, you know, we had on the disco clothes and we were looking for a night out on the town. We ended up going to a nightclub after dinner, and, you know, it just wasn't the kind of atmosphere that I was used to, because at this point, you know, I was fairly innocent for my age. You know, I came from a very strict Serbian Orthodox background, and I wasn't allowed to date until I was 18. So, you know, and I just turned 19, so my experiences, world experiences, were very limited at the time. So 3 of us decided that we wanted to come back to Windsor, and we were going to meet back at the University of Windsor pub, you know, and have a nightcap before we went home. So it was fairly early in the evening, probably around 10 o'clock. And I was driving alone on the freeway because my 2 girlfriends that left at the same time were in the car ahead of me on the freeway. I unexpectedly got a flat tire. It was like a blowout, and I thought, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. I didn't know what to do. And I thought if people saw me stop, and that if I were more visible, I would be more safe. So I actually stopped the car in the right-hand lane of the freeway, and I got out of my car. And I was really dressed kind of flashy that night, and, you know, I had on a really nice a dressy pantsuit, and I was wearing a full-length white rabbit fur coat, which was the style back then, so it's a little bit different now. And plus my car was a bright yellow car, and it was fairly new. And what I was doing was stopping traffic in the right lane, and there was a guy behind me that couldn't proceed because of my car. And he stuck his head out the window and he said, "Lady, what's the matter?" And I said, "Well, I have a flat tire." He says, "Well, pull over to the side of the freeway and I'll change it for you." I thought, great, that sounds good. This guy was a good Samaritan. He didn't have to stop and help me, you know, so I was really lucky to have him. So the 2 of us moved to the shoulder of the freeway, and I was waiting for him to finish, you know, changing the flat tire. My car had a hatchback. The hatchback was open, and then all of a sudden more cars were on the freeway ahead of my car, stopping, and all these guys approached us. And before you know it, I was surrounded by men, and there was a jab at my side, and a man announced, "This is a stick-up lady, you know, take off the coat."
There was a jab at your side.
Oh, yeah.
So you felt, was it a gun? What was that?
It was a gun.
There was a gun that
I
he
had
pulled on
never
you.
seen a gun before in my life. I couldn't believe it.
Wow.
Yeah, in the meantime, this man that helped me, his name I later learned was Freddie. Freddie was being robbed at gunpoint as well. So there were 2 groups. And what they did with him is they tied him up and they put him in the hatchback of my car. In the meantime, minus my coat, I had one guy on each side of me dragging me towards one of their cars. I thought, wow, I can't believe this is happening. It just was so sudden. And it was like an illusion out of a nightmare or something.
Unreal, completely unreal.
So as the one guy tried to guide me into the back seat of his car, I was wearing these big platform boots, which were the style, you know, in the 70s, and I kicked him as hard as I could, and I ran for that freeway. And my blouse was a wraparound blouse. It wrapped around my breast, and it tied at the back. And one of the guys went to grab my sash at the back, and it undid my blouse. So here I am screaming in the right-hand lane of the Detroit freeway, you know, screaming for someone to stop to help me. But you know what? Cars actually swerved to avoid me. Nobody stopped.
You're kidding.
Yes, and before you know it, I'm out cold. Someone punched me, and the next thing you know, I wake up in this car, and I've got guys all over me. My clothes are loose, and their hands are all over me, and they're talking about where they're going to take me. So apparently one of the guys, his mother was working that night, and there was no one home, so we were going to go to his house. So I get taken to the first location in Detroit where, you know, when I was pushed into this back bedroom with a gun pointed at my head the entire time, all of the men took turns raping me.
Oh my goodness. Oh, Melissa. And at what point did you, I mean, I cannot imagine what kind of experience that was for you to walk through. How did that end up? I mean, what happened at that moment when you're being violated in the worst way by these despicable characters? I mean, how did you get through that? What happened in the end? How did you survive that? How did you get away? How did you
I know,
escape?
all very good questions. There was never a question that I was going to die. I really, truly believed, until I walked away, I truly believed that I was going to die that night. And what happens is, after you're threatened enough and you're beaten enough, and I was really beaten up, you know, your mind and your whole spirit goes into survival mode, and you just do what you have to do in order to live. So it was like I was a zombie, you know, just tuned out of, you know, the emotion shut down, and I just basically did what I had to do to live. And of course the gun was always present. I was constantly being threatened, and these were really bad dudes. Like, when I think about, I was able to observe this gang mentality that I'd never seen before. I found it absolutely fascinating, you know, and it seemed like every guy had to prove his violence, and he had to prove how mean he was in order to establish that pecking order in the gang. And I found that really fascinating. But there was one guy that came out as a clear leader, and his name was Joe. His street name was Clever Joe. And Joe, by far, was the meanest, and I was more afraid of him than anyone. He was by far, you know, the worst guy, and he was the most violent towards me, you know, the whole night. After a certain amount of time, we had to leave this kid's house because his mother would be coming home. So Joe announced that he wanted someone to drive him and me to a guy named Dell's house. Now, Dell was a drug dealer in Detroit, and we were going to go to his house to buy drugs. So, you know, we left the first location, went to the second location, and there I spent the night with the two men, Dell, the drug dealer, and Clever Joe, the leader of the gang. Always a gun present, always threatened, always knew that he was the leader, and I knew I had to do what he told me to do. And I kind of played the game, and that's how I really do believe that that's how I was able to be set free, is that I really did manipulate him. I could kind of instinctually know what he expected of me. When he wanted me to be submissive, I was submissive. When he talked to me, I answered him. You know, it was really contrite. Like, it was really contrived what he was doing, and instinctively I responded that way. And I really did convince him during the time at the drug dealer's house that I would not go to the police if he let me go. He did kind of allude to the fact that he wished that we had met under different circumstances, which, you know, from my point of view, was unthinkable.
Meaning that he was attracted to you, interested in you, and in some other capacity? Wow.
Now, I have a friend, Dr. Laurie Gray, who is a psychologist, and she calls the way I explain the manipulation in my book, she calls it a perfect example of psychological forensic profiling, which at the young age I didn't even know I was doing, but apparently, you know, it is something rare.
Amazing that your instinct completely took over and really was the reason for your survival. So did he let you go?
He did. The next morning, all the guys from the night before were at the drug dealer's house, and they were in another room talking about where they were going to dump my body once they killed me. And you know, they talked about this ditch down the end of the street, and I could hear all of this very clearly. And then Joe came into the room and he said, "Follow me right now and do exactly what I tell you." Of course I was going to do that, you know. So we exited the house, and I could see my car parked there. It was damaged, parked on the side of the street, and he said, "Get in the car right now and drive away." And as I moved slowly towards the car, one of the other guys said, "To get back to Canada, just drive down there." And I looked down the street, and I could actually see the ditch they were talking about. So when I got in that car, I drove in the opposite direction.
My goodness. Oh my goodness. I mean, what a story. There's it must have been absolutely unreal for you.
Yes.
And I cannot imagine what you went through, but you escaped. And what a taste of freedom that must have been at that moment when you got in that car and you had a chance to drive away, and you had survived this
Actually, in the
experience.
car, I lost it. I totally became hysterical.
Oh, I can imagine.
Like, I really did believe they were following me, for one thing, because I was driving in the wrong way. And I absolutely, all that survival mode was gone, and I was completely hysterical. And of course it did, like all rape victims, you always think in terms of, oh my God, I'm gonna go home, I'm gonna pretend like nothing happened, I'm gonna go to work like I'm scheduled to go to work and never say a word. But I was in Detroit, and was I really in Detroit? I wasn't even sure where I was at that point.
Of course.
Also,
Completely disoriented and
completely.
Yeah.
And not only that, I had no idea to get back across the border, and I had no money. They had stolen my purse.
Right.
So, you know, and I had no idea what I was going to do. So I drove for a couple of blocks. I saw a police car parked at the side of the street, so I stopped.
And the police helped you. What a story, my goodness. We are going to be right back with Melissa. We have some interesting developments as a result of this story that we're going to ask Melissa about. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
Hi, this is Senator Mike Duffy inviting you to join me and my friend John Fairley for Face to Face. I think you'll find it an interesting and entertaining half hour right here on TV Cogeco.
Welcome back to Plugged In. We're here with Melissa McCormick, and we've already heard about her incredible, amazing story. What I want to ask Melissa is, Melissa, how did you go from that particular place in your life to such a place of strength and moving through healing, moving through coping, in order to get to the point where you wanted to share your experiences with others?
Well, what people don't understand is that sometimes sexual assault is not necessarily the worst part. You know, being sexually assaulted. The aftermath is way more difficult, and believe me, the shock of being alive, because I really believed that I was going to die that night, was more difficult to cope with than you can imagine. And you know, there were months and months where I just couldn't get out of bed. I went to see a psychiatrist right away. My family doctor referred me. And of course, what did he do? He prescribed drugs. And you know, I was given Valium for anxiety and, you know, painkillers for massive headaches that I was experiencing. I just could not deal with the pain of what had happened. And I eventually became a drug addict. I just could not cope with what happened, and so I started doubling up on dosages. I started, you know, taking them combined drugs. You know, it was an awful period of my life. Awful. I couldn't go back to work. My friends, you know, didn't want to see me. You know, it's when you're really going through something hard and you're emotional, people just don't want to be around you. And I knew that, you know, everyone around me was affected by what had happened to me, so I felt that guilt as well, and I was embarrassed and all of those other things. And then I realized that, you know, first of all, the fact that I was a drug addict was shocking, because I was brought up so strictly that I wasn't a drinker, I wasn't a smoker, nothing. And so when I found out that I was abusing drugs, I quit cold turkey, and I thought, you know what, it's time for me to move forward. This is nuts.
So you moved into a complete different space of healing, and you wrote a book?
Yes.
You wrote a book about your experiences. Tell us a little bit more about that book, because I know that it's available for members of the community to read.
The book was a result of years of media and, you know, writers and reporters wanting to tell my story, because to this day it's still the worst case and the most highly publicized case of sexual assault in Detroit history. So I was constantly approached to write the book. But you know, I've never been quoted properly in the press. They always misquote me. So I thought if anybody's going to write it, it's going to be me, because that way I can control exactly how everything is said and, you know, the words. And I didn't want to sensationalize it. I wanted it to be a story of truth in order to help others.
Now, you wrote the book in, was it 2004?
Yes.
It was released?
Yes.
And the book's called Queen's Daughter. Did that help you to move into a place of coping and healing as well?
Actually, during the actual writing of the book, I actually went into a very deep depression for the first time in years, and I thought that I had handled everything, but it was like reliving the story. And you know, I coped with that and then moved forward again. And so, you know what, it was hard. It was hard to put it on paper. And of course, you know, when it happened in '76, people were so negative towards me and so mean. I got hate mail in the mail. You know, so when the book was released, I expected the same result. I expected the negativity and I expected bad press, et cetera, but it's been the total opposite.
You got great support. Now tell us why it's called The Queen's Daughter. Is there significance there?
The reason it's called The Queen's Daughter is because the guys that kidnapped me on the freeway didn't know anything about Canada other than it had a reigning queen. So because the way I was dressed and perhaps the way I talked or the way I carried myself, they thought that I was the Queen's daughter. That's what they called me. So instead of asking my name, they'd say, "Hey, Queen's daughter." So that's the title of the book.
Fascinating. Now it is available through your website?
Yes, you can purchase it at queensdaughter.com. It's also available at Chapters, Indigo, all the major bookstores in Windsor carry it. So
fantastic. Now I'm really excited to move into another area here. We're going to talk about an upcoming short film that has been produced in honor of your story. Tell us a little bit about that, Melissa.
The short film is called Determined. It is written, directed, and produced by Scott Sherrick, who is originally from Windsor. He's a filmmaker from Toronto. And I got a chance to view the completed film in Toronto a couple weekends ago, and I have to tell you, Gretel, it was absolutely beyond anything that I ever expected. He nailed it. He absolutely nailed it. And what was important for me was that the message be a positive message after something so horrible.
Of course, of course. Now, this is a very recent development. It's going to be entered into the Toronto Film Festival this year.
Yes.
Wonderful. And following that, hot on its heels, is a full-length feature film that's in development.
Exactly. And the feature film will be called The Queen's Daughter after the book. So I'm really looking forward to that as well.
Fantastic. Now, you had mentioned earlier that viewing that film was not as perhaps traumatic as maybe you thought it might be or expected it to be.
Yes, I was really nervous and a little bit anxious because I thought, you know, if I see this on screen, will I relive it even after 30 years? And I have to tell you, there was no problem watching it at all. It was done tastefully. It is a little bit shocking, but I have to tell you that the end result is a wonderful short film that is inspiring, and it's positive, and many women and men too will relate to it. So I was absolutely thrilled, and the quality of the movie was beyond anything that I expected.
You know, Melissa, to hear you talk about the experience and just your overall way that you're relating to this incredible story, where do you get your strength from? I mean, I have to ask, where does it come from?
You know, I don't know where the strength comes. Maybe perhaps I was always strong. I don't know. But one of the things that strikes me when you ask me that is that one of the things that I did shortly after the sexual assault is, you know, people were so, you know, always whispering and talking behind my back, and you know, very critical. And I learned to like put up my shoulders and, you know, just, you know, say a couple of nasty words to myself, not to them. And I faked it. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to pretend like I'm okay. And then eventually I did become okay. You know, like I believed in myself because I defended myself in my own head. So it was kind of like self-talk.
Sort of fake it till you make it.
Yeah, yeah, fake it. I love that. Fake it till you make it. Yeah. Absolutely. And you know, you have to do what you have to do to make your life good. And you know, of course, you know, there's the spiritual aspect of it, because after being, you know, gang raped, the last thing I believed in was God. So I had to reestablish my relationship with God. And I did the work. I educated myself. I went back to the university, studied religious studies. I'm constantly reading, growing, And one of the decisions I did make was to be open about it, and that I think has saved me and has speeded up the healing process so quickly. Is I refused to be a statistic, and I was determined that I was going to not be that statistic, that I would be different.
Well, that's amazing, and that's, I think, the most powerful message that comes through is that you haven't adopted the role of a victim. And especially as you talk about, having to walk through certain steps in order to get to where you are today, it's such a process. And through the substance abuse that occurred for you, and then moving into more of a healthy place of healing through, some of your other avenues. You're writing your book, and you have some amazing other motivational speeches that you provide to the members of the community. All of that, you've just gone from strength to strength. And it really is incredible because you're such a leader for so many people in the community who can look to you for that strength who are in need.
Yes, one thing about sexual assault victims is sometimes it's hard to be strong and to be out there. And I basically have taken, I've employed myself to be the spokesperson for people who do not yet have the courage to stand up. And someday they will, and hopefully if they see me standing up and saying, hey, this is my life, this is what happened, and life is good, then and everybody can do it, everybody can move forward. And life is good, it is.
Life is good. Well, we want to talk about that a little bit more and go into some of your achievements and your accomplishments and some of the work that you have done with our community. So when we come back, we'll be talking further with Melissa about some of that work that she's doing. Don't go away.
Thank you very much. Oh. I would like to thank my three beautiful children, Michael McCormick, Lisa, and Kelly Pekosnik, for inspiring me every day to be the best that I can be. I would like to thank Sherilyn Stachow for nominating me for this award, and I'd like to acknowledge all of my friends at the Women's Economic Forum and at the Sexual Assault Crisis Center for supporting me for all these years.
Hi, and welcome back to Plugged In. I am here again with Melissa McCormick, and she has gone from strength to strength. She's a success in our community. Melissa was last year's Athena Award recipient, past president of Windsor-Essex County Sexual Assault Crisis Center, former president of Windsor Economic Forum, and a former Rotarian, successful businesswoman. The accolades go on and on and on. But Melissa, you have now moved into a space where you are a motivational speaker, and you're quite involved with a specific youth program in our community. Tell us about some of the work and what you're doing with those two avenues.
Well, my youth program is, it involves me going into the schools, and I talk to the high school students, and I talk very openly about sexual assault, and of course I talk about my personal story. And the youth program just doesn't stop there. I get sponsors for this, by the way. What happens is, a sponsor will buy books at a big discount, and then I'm able to give each student a book after I speak to them, and you wouldn't believe how happy they are and how thankful, because in this economy they don't have the money. But anyway.
Now this is your book.
This is my book, yes. But what it does is it opens up the channels for these young people to get in contact with me. You can go to mel@queensdaughter.com, that's my email address, and ask questions that they're afraid to ask in front of their peers and afraid to ask in front of adults. And that's where my job really begins, is continuing a relationship with young people to help them move forward. You would not believe how many of them have been sexually assaulted or know someone who has, or has a family member who is in distress, and I'm able to tell it like it is and have that one-on-one relationship with them to give them the strength.
And what is your advice for victims of sexual assault in terms of seeking additional assistance or help in the community? What are some avenues that they can pursue?
Windsor has an amazing crisis center. It is one of the best in Ontario. Back in 1976, they didn't have a crisis center. They didn't have a social, agency that I could go to for help. Now they have these agencies in place, and they have different programs for people.
We have the hotline number actually for
Excellent.
For that up on the screen right now. So with all of the access to these services, what is your advice for victims of sexual assault in terms of moving into a place of healing and empowerment?
In order to heal more quickly, you have to talk about it. Whether it's privately to a counselor or whether it's to a family member, you must talk about it. That's one of the things I was very open about. Everything always was and always am today. And always know that there is hope. Be determined, persevere. It is, once you get past that initial shock of what happens, life is good. And, I'm here as an example of someone who lived through it and who has a really good life.
And you mentioned now, we're talking about your really good life. You've moved into, having a wonderful family and having, had your own business and being a successful woman on so many levels.
Yes, yes. I was told I would never have children, after what happened to me, because I was, pretty damaged. And I have 3 beautiful children, and I'm very proud of them. They're all adults now, and I have a good relationship with all 3.
What a wonderful gift. And what just came to my mind, Melissa, is that you have such a message for not only victims of sexual assault, but also people who are struggling with job loss, with with divorce, or with family death, or losing a child. I mean, there are so many difficulties in life where you're a pillar of support and a paragon of strength for so many, and such a source of inspiration. So I think that really that's the message today, is that no matter what struggles life is bringing, empower yourself.
Yes.
See it through. What's your message to all people?
If you look at the big picture and you see the light at the end of the tunnel, it's easier to be objective about what you've been through. And it's a little bit of selflessness too, knowing that it's your duty to be the best person you can be in your lifetime, and that you have to move forward, if not for your own sake, even though you feel crushed inside, for the sake of everyone else who's around you and who's connected to you. And that's what kept me going. I did it for everybody else, and look at all the benefits I'm reaping from it. It's great.
Oh, wonderful. You are a true joy, a true pleasure, and a true source of inspiration.
Thank you.
I thank you so sincerely for coming to speak with us today.